In the frozen heights of December 1942, over the treacherous Solomon Islands in the Pacific, a young American waist gunner named Eddie Kowalski, barely out of his teens, clutched the handles of his Browning M2.5 zero-caliber machine gun. The B-17 Flying Fortress shuddered in turbulence as a sleek Japanese Zero fighter sliced into view at his 10 o'clock position about 300 yards out, banking hard across his line of sight like a predator in full hunt. Kowalski's heart pounded. This was the moment his training had prepared him for. He swung the gun, lined up the crosshairs dead center on the Zero's fuselage, and squeezed the trigger. 50 rounds erupted in a deafening roar, tracers painting a glowing arc through the humid air. But as Kowalski watched, every bullet sailed harmlessly behind the enemy's tail. The Zero didn't even jink or evade. It simply continued its path unscathed, while Kowalski's ammo belt dwindled. This wasn't a fluke of nerves or poor marksmanship. It was a scene repeated thousands of times across the skies of Europe and the Pacific during the early years of World War II. Brave, well-trained American gunners armed with some of the most reliable machine guns ever built were missing their targets, not sporadically, but systematically. The U.S. Army Air Forces knew something was wrong. In early 1943, they launched a rigorous study poring over gun camera footage from bomber missions. The findings were devastating. Trained aerial gunners were hitting crossing targets, enemies slicing perpendicular to their line of fire at rates below 4%. For every 100 rounds fired, 96 vanished into the void. The math painted a grim picture. A typical fighter interception lasted just 8 to 12 seconds before the attacker peeled away or vanished from range. The Browning M2 spat out about 800 rounds per minute, roughly 13 per second. In a 10-second burst, a gunner might unleash 130 rounds. At 4% accuracy, that yielded perhaps 5 hits. But 5.50 caliber bullets rarely sufficed against rugged foes like the Mitsubishi A6M0 or the Focke-Wulf FW190, which could shrug off dozens of rounds and limp home. The human toll was staggering. In 1943 alone, the USAAF's 8th Air Force over Europe lost an average of 188 bombers monthly. Each B-17 carried a crew of 10, translating to 1,880 airmen killed, captured, or missing every 30 days. Many of those losses stemmed from bomber formations unable to fend off swarming fighters. These gunners weren't failing due to cowardice or incompetence. They followed their training to the letter. Track the target, maintain a steady sight picture, fire controlled bursts. The culprit wasn't human error. It was unforgiving physics. And in the high-stakes arena of aerial combat, physics trumped bravery every time. At its core, the problem was deflection error, the gap between where a target appeared and where it would be by the time bullets arrived. Human instinct dictated aiming directly at the visible threat, a tactic that worked for stationary ground targets or slow-moving prey like deer at 20 miles per hour. But World War II fighters screamed across the sky at 300 miles per hour or more. Late war jets like the Messerschmitt Me 262 hit 540 miles per hour. At those velocities, the delay in bullet travel became deadly. A 50 caliber round exited the M2 at about 2,900 feet per second, blindingly fast for short ranges. But aerial duels often unfolded at 200 to 400 yards, where the bullet's flight time mattered. At 300 yards, 900 feet, it took roughly 0.31 seconds to reach the target. In that blink, a Zero at 300 miles per hour covered 136 feet, about 11 car lengths. Aim at the plane you saw, and your bullets pierced empty air where it had been moments ago. Deflection wasn't a subtle tweak. It demanded massive counterintuitive leads. 15 to 20 feet ahead of a target's nose for a 90-degree crossing shot at 300 yards, gunners had to fire at blank sky, betting the enemy would fly into their stream. Instinct rebelled against this. It felt like missing on purpose. Moreover, deflection varied wildly. Target speed, angle, range, altitude, climbs, dives, and the bomber's own maneuvers all factored in. A B-17 ball turret gunner facing a head-on BF-10-9 attack needed different leads than for a side beam assault. With just seconds to compute amid flak bursts, oxygen masks fogging at 25,000 feet, and adrenaline surging, the human brain buckled. This wasn't a new riddle. Deflection's roots trace to World War I, when aviation leaped from novelty to nightmare. Early observers in pusher biplanes like the British FE-2B discovered no allowance, or non-deflection shooting. By aligning the gun with the aircraft's motion, pilots or gunners could fire without leading if the target crossed at certain angles. But as speeds climbed, the issue intensified. In 1924, an American artillery officer whose identity remains obscure in declassified records, though often linked to ballistics pioneers, published a prescient paper on the problem of lead in aerial gunnery. Drawing from WWII experiences, it warned that aircraft velocities beyond 150 miles per hour would render intuitive aiming obsolete. Tables detailed leads: 47 feet for a 200-yard, 90-degree cross at 300 miles per hour, 94 feet at 400 yards. The conclusion: without mechanical aids, gunners would become obsolete. The U.S. Army filed it away, dismissing it amid interwar budget cuts and faith in American marksmanship heritage. From Daniel Boone to Sergeant York, training reflected this hubris. Pre-WWII USAAF gunnery courses lasted 4 weeks, with trainees firing just 1,000 rounds, mostly at static targets or slow-towed sleeves at 150 miles per hour. No simulation captured a FWU-190 barrel rolling through a formation at 400 miles per hour. Graduates arrived in combat theaters ill-equipped, discovering their skills worthless against real foes. By mid-1942, losses mounted. 8th Air Force's October 1943 Schweinfurt raids saw 20% bomber attrition, 60 of 291 B-17 lost. Debriefs echoed frustration. Guns functioned, but bullets missed. Across the Atlantic, the Royal Air Force, RAF, confronted the crisis earlier during the 1940 Battle of Britain. Squadron leader Horace George Darley, note, the transcript's Horace Darley is likely a misspelling, of number. 609 Squadron grounded his Spitfire unit for 3 days in August amid Luftwaffe onslaughts for radical experiments. Inspired by clay pigeon shooting, Darley hypothesized pilots could feel leads subconsciously, like shotgun hunters. He rejected calculated aiming, instead instructing, "Don't aim, track the motion, fire while turning." Pilots made 40 passes at towed banners, hit rates doubling from 6% to 12%. Darley's August 18th report argued the conscious brain lagged modern speeds. Subconscious motion sensing was key. Fighter Command circulated it, but adoption was patchy. Official manuals clung to marksmanship basics. Yet squadrons embracing it saw better kill ratios through autumn 1940. American observers noted Darley's methods, but USAAF bombers posed unique hurdles. Fighter pilots maneuvered their planes to generate leads. Bomber gunners were fixed, unable to use aircraft motion. Waist gunners and B-17s or Lancasters stood exposed, reliant on manual swings. Solution: blend training with tech. By 1943, USAAF revamped programs. Schools like Las Vegas Army Airfield graduated 600 gunners and 215 co-pilots every 5 weeks. Training began on gun trucks, machine guns on pickup beds, firing at clay pigeons or moving targets. Graduates advanced to towed sleeves, then live fire against radio-controlled drones. Ammo allotment jumped from 1,000 to 5,000 rounds. Courses extended to 10 weeks. The spot shooting method emerged, credited to gunners like Staff Sergeant William W. Fleming of the 303rd Bomb Group. Fleming's combat notebook sketched leads in plane lengths, 1 for shallow crosses, 3 for steep. Tested on USS Lexington in March 1944, it doubled hit rates from 4.2% to 9.1% in 6 weeks. Pacific carriers adopted it. USAAF called it radius of action shooting, with manuals illustrating leads via wingspans. This visual system leveraged human strengths. Brains excel at relative sizing, not abstract distances. Lead by 2 plane lengths. Used the target as its own ruler, bypassing math. By late 1944, loss rates dipped. 8th Air Force's July mission saw 3.4% attrition versus October, 1943's 5.2%, saving hundreds of lives. Training alone couldn't conquer deflection. Mechanics were needed. Enter MIT's instrumentation laboratory under Dr. Charles Stark Draper. In 1940, Draper repurposed gyroscopic turn indicators into a lead computing site. By July 1943, the Mark 14 prototype emerged, a 28-pound box with gyros for elevation and traverse. Gunners dialed target wingspan for range, tracked for 2 seconds. Cams and gears solved equations 30 times per second, projecting a glowing reticle ahead of the target. Tests at Naval Air Station Norfolk jumped hit rates from 5% to 25% after a week. Sperry Gyroscope produced 85,000 units, installed on 20mm Oerlikon and 40mm Bofors guns aboard warships. It accounted for 78.6% of kamikaze kills in the Philippines. For bombers, it evolved into the K-14 for P-51 Mustangs. With dual modes for air and ground, the Mark 14 wasn't flawless, required smooth tracking, vulnerable to jams, but it automated what humans struggled with, saving countless ships and crews. Even with tools, the mind rebelled. Army psychologist Captain Harold Klein's 1944 studies revealed threat fixation collapse. Gunners started with proper leads but drifted backward as danger intensified, reverting to instinctual aiming at the scary thing. Head-on attacks with 500+ miles per hour closures triggered this fastest. Gunners had 2 seconds before enemy fire. Solution? Repetition to embed motion, unconscious competence. Naval schools at Jacksonville used motorized turrets and high-speed boat tows for 50 to 70 passes daily. Veterans maintained leads amid terror, their hands acting independently. But wartime urgency meant compromises. Many gunners flew with partial mastery, effective in calm but crumbling under chaos. This stratified defenses, formations with veterans repelled attacks. Green crews suffered. Luftwaffe pilots exploited this, probing for weak fire. Consider Sergeant Albert Graveline, a WWII observer gunner who scored a victory despite rudimentary sights. Or RAF's John Charles Dundas of 609 Squadron, an ace with 13.5 kills before his 1940 death. His successes highlighted deflection's rewards, though he perished in a dogfight with Helmut Wick. In the Pacific, Fleming's spot method saved carriers like Enterprise from zeros. One anonymized USAAF gunner recalled, First mission, I aimed at the 109, missed everything. After training, I led by 3 lengths. Watched him fly into my tracers. Felt like magic. By 1944 to 45, combined training and tech transformed gunnery. Hit rates climbed to 20% plus. Bomber losses fell as P-51 escorts and improved defenses cleared skies. But overclaims persisted. Historians estimate 2 to 1 to 10 to 1 discrepancies. Gunners often credited for shared kills. RAF bomber commands 45% aircrew death rate, 125,000 served, 55,573 killed, dwarfed 8th Air Force's approximately 10% total personnel, aircrew, approximately 20 to 25% due to night ops navigation perils, longer campaigns, and flak-heavy targets. Daytime U.S. raids allowed visual aiming but exposed formations. Night RAF ops hid bombers but complicated accuracy. Butt report, only 5% hit within 5 miles early on. Analysis, deflection exposed training gaps, but adaptations showcased human ingenuity. Without them, Allied air campaigns might have stalled, prolonging the war. Deflection's echoes endure. Post-World War II, Mark 14 evolved into digital systems like the F-86's A-1 sight. Vietnam's F-4 Phantom used radar-assisted leads. Today's AIM-120 AMRAAM missiles compute intercepts miles ahead. Video games like War Thunder simulate it, frustrating players until instinct kicks in. Top Gun still teaches guns-only maneuvers for spatial awareness. Beyond aviation, Phalanx C, IWS, and CRAM systems apply the principle against missiles. The lesson? Instincts fail against physics. Survival demands adaptation. Those gunners, aiming at empty sky amid hellfire, proved humanity's resilience, rewiring brains to defy intuition, turning desperation into victory. In the end, World War II aerial gunnery wasn't just about bullets. It was a battle of minds against motion, where empty air held the key to survival. Their story reminds us, in war's chaos, true heroism lies in trusting the invisible. The psychological strain on gunners was profound. Locked in cramped turrets or exposed waist positions, they faced death with every mission. The 91st Bomb Group's records show gunners had the highest casualty rates among B-17 crews, 25% killed or wounded per mission in 1943. Fear of threat fixation collapse, as psychologist Captain Harold Klein termed it, haunted them. Gunners described visceral dread as fighters closed. "You see those cannons flashing and your brain screams, 'Shoot now,'" said Sergeant James R. Walsh. "But if you don't lead, you're dead." Post-mission interviews revealed 70% of gunners experienced nightmares, often reliving missed shots or crewmates' deaths. Moral dilemmas compounded stress. Gunners knew stray bullets could hit friendly aircraft in tight formations. During the February 1944 Big Week raids, 10% of B-17 losses were attributed to friendly fire, as panicked gunners fired wildly at crossing targets. The guilt of accidental kills lingered. One anonymous gunner confessed in a 1945 diary, "I saw my tracers hit a fortress, killed 2 boys. I'll carry that forever. War crimes like Luftwaffe pilots strafing bailed-out crews further eroded morale. The 1943 Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid saw 36% of downed airmen shot in parachutes per Red Cross reports, fueling gunners' resolve but also their rage. The deflection revolution's legacy endures in modern warfare. The F-35 Lightning II's helmet-mounted display projects lead points for guns, echoing the Mark 14's reticle. Drone operators tracking targets at 500 miles per hour apply the same predictive logic. Beyond combat, the principle informs fields like autonomous driving, where algorithms predict pedestrian paths, akin to gunners leading Zeros. The human lesson is profound. Instinct, though powerful, can betray. Gunners who aimed at empty sky, defying fear, embodied adaptability. Their story, etched in the blood and frost of World War II's skies, reminds us that survival demands trusting the invisible, whether physics, training, or courage.